Okay, so what if you could turn your notes into a podcast? Not just read them out loud, but have two AI hosts actually have a natural back and forth conversation about them. Well, that's exactly the promise of Google's new Notebook LM feature. But the voices it's creating are so realistic, they're raising some pretty serious questions.
But here's the thing, they are AI. And it's not just that they sound human, it's how they sound human that has people both completely amazed and, honestly, a little weirded out. So, what is actually going on beneath the surface of these synthetic voices?
To really get what's happening here, we first need to look at the different formats, kind of like the different shows that Google has designed for these AI hosts.
Notebook LM gives you a few different options, but the two most fascinating are the deep dive and the debate. The deep dive is all about collaboration, right? Two hosts working together to figure things out. But the debate, that's built for conflict. Two hosts taking opposite sides to argue a point. Now, that default deep dive format is built on this really simple but super effective structure. You've got two key roles: the questioner, who's basically our stand-in asking all the questions we'd ask, and then you've got the expert who does the heavy lifting of explaining everything.
So, how does Google pull this off? How do they create a conversation that sounds so unscripted? It turns out it's this really clever two-step process that separates the writing from the performance.
First up, you've got the brain of the operation. That's Google's Gemini 1.5 Pro model. It reads all of your source material, and then it acts like a showrunner. It doesn't just summarize, it writes a whole screenplay, complete with dialogue assigned to each host.
And then comes the voice. This is where a technology called Soundstorm steps in. Think of it like the voice actor. It takes that script from Gemini and performs it, turning plain text into that incredibly realistic audio that has everyone buzzing. But the real secret sauce, the thing that makes you swear you're listening to real people, is this concept called disfluency. You know, all those ums, ahs, and little pauses we make when we talk? In Notebook LM, those aren't bugs. They are put there on purpose.
And you might be thinking, why would you engineer imperfection? Well, that's the whole magic trick, right? Those little pauses make it sound like the AI is actually thinking, searching for the right word just like we do. It keeps the whole thing from sounding like a robot and makes the conversation feel real.
But here's where things get really interesting. As tons of people started using this feature, listening to hours of these AI-generated conversations, they started noticing a pattern, something that probably wasn't supposed to be there. It all came down to a question. Are these roles, the questioner and the expert, really assigned randomly? The team behind the feature said it was supposed to be a 50-50 shot, but that's not what people felt like they were hearing.
And it turns out people's suspicions were spot on. When some AI evaluators actually ran the numbers, they found something pretty startling. In the default setting, the male-sounding voice ended up leading the conversation almost 70% of the time.
This prompted one independent analyst, Craig Van Slyke, to point out something kind of uncomfortable. He observed that while the female voice was often the one delivering the expert knowledge, the male voice was the one directing the conversation. A dynamic, he says, that looks a lot like gender biases we see in the real world. Okay, so we have what users are hearing. How does that square with what Google says it's doing? Is this pattern intentional, or is it just an accident?
And when you put them side by side, you see a pretty big disconnect. Google's public design principles say to avoid specifying gender. They say roles are assigned 50-50, but what users and researchers are actually observing is a consistent, gendered pattern in the final product.
So what gives? Why is there this mismatch? Now, we can only speculate here, but there are a few leading theories. It could be something called acoustic bias, where lower-pitched voices are just perceived as more dominant because of the data they were trained on. Or it could be something as simple as the design rules for one product not being fully applied to another. All right, let's just take a step back for a second. We're talking about two AI voices in a note-taking app. Why does any of this actually matter? It matters because this isn't really just about one cool feature. It's a perfect little case study in how AI systems can accidentally soak up and even amplify our own subtle societal biases, even when the creators are trying their best to prevent it.
And you better believe the people using these tools are paying attention. We're talking about a Discord community with over 65,000 members, and they were the ones who first started flagging this issue. It just goes to show that these design choices have a real impact on real people. Which brings us to the final and maybe the most important takeaway from all of this. The case of Notebook LM's AI hosts forces us to look in the mirror. And they make us ask a really tough question about the future we're all building. When our AI reflects our own biases back at us, is it the job of the engineers to fix the code, or is it our job to fix the society that created the data in the first place? That's a question we're all going to have to answer.